On a bright, early summer morning in the mountain city of Kofu, a 20-year-old woman named Miho Yamamoto told her family she was going to the library. She pulled on her helmet, started her motorcycle, and rode away down a quiet residential lane. It was an ordinary sentence on an ordinary day. She never came home. 2 days later, her motorcycle was found abandoned in front of Kofu Station in the center of town, but her handbag surfaced somewhere else entirely, washed up on a beach on the far coast of the Sea of Japan, more than 200 kilometers away, across a wall of mountains. Kofu is landlocked. There is no easy way for a bag left in a mountain city to end up on a distant northern shore. That single, impossible piece of geography would haunt the case for the next 40 years. Because what happened to Miho Yamamoto has never been agreed upon. The police say science eventually gave them an answer. Her family says that answer pointed at a stranger. And between those two positions sits a grave that one side visits and the other refuses to believe. This is the story of a woman who left for the library and vanished into a mystery that Japan has never been able to close. To understand why one missing woman became a national controversy, you have to understand the strange decade she vanished into. Through the late 1970s and into the 1980s, a quiet pattern was forming along the coasts of Japan. Ordinary people, a young couple on a beach, a nurse, a student walking home in the evening, simply stopped existing. No struggle anyone could name, no body, no ransom, just an absence where a person had been. For years, most of these cases were treated as runaways, accidents, or suicides. Families were told to wait and to hope. Only much later would the country learn what had actually been happening in some of those cases. In 2002, North Korea admitted that its agents had abducted Japanese citizens from those very coastlines and carried them across the sea. Some of the missing were confirmed. A handful were allowed to return. The revelation reshaped how Japan looked at every unexplained coastal disappearance from that era, and it turned a private grief in a mountain city into something much larger. But in 1984, none of that was known yet. Kofu was simply a regional city ringed by mountains west of Tokyo, far from the sea. The kind of place where nothing dramatic was supposed to happen. Miho was 20 years old. By the accounts that survive, she was an unremarkable young woman living an unremarkable life, which is exactly why her disappearance made no sense. There was no scandal to explain it, no debt, no reason to run, and in a detail the case would never stop circling back to. Her own father was reportedly a police officer. She had grown up inside the very institution that would one day be accused of getting her fate wrong. She also had an identical twin sister. Remember that. 20 years later, that twin's blood would sit at the center of everything. Retrace the morning, and it stays maddeningly simple. June 4th, 1984. Around 10 o'clock, Miho leaves the family home in Kofu on her motorcycle. She says she is going to the library. She rides off into a normal Monday, and then the trail scatters in 3 directions that refuse to line up. The first thread appeared 2 days later. On June 6th, her motorcycle was discovered parked in front of JR Kofu Station, abandoned in the middle of the city. Not out on some lonely mountain road, not at a library, in the busiest, most public place in town. Whatever happened, it seemed to pass through the center of Kofu in plain view and left no witness anyone could find. The second thread is the one that breaks the map. On June 8th, 4 days after she vanished, a small handbag she had been carrying was recovered on Arahama Beach in Kashiwazaki, a city on the coast of Niigata Prefecture. That shoreline faces the Sea of Japan. It is more than 200 kilometers from Kofu, on the opposite side of a mountain range. A young woman's bag, left behind in a landlocked city, had somehow reached the open sea. And then there was a third thread, one no one connected to Miho at the time. On June 21st, roughly 200 kilometers further up the same coast, at Yuza in Yamagata Prefecture, an unidentified body washed ashore. It was a woman, the reports estimated, somewhere between 20 and 40, who had been dead perhaps 1 to 2 months. There was nothing to name her. 2 days later, she was cremated, and her ashes were placed in a temple in Yuza as an unknown person. A stranger given a quiet resting place by strangers. In the summer of 1984, those were 3 separate facts: a motorcycle in a city, a bag on a beach, a body further north. No one drew a line between them. The search for Miho went cold almost immediately because there was simply nowhere for it to go. A person had walked out of her own life on a sunny morning, and the only clues she left behind pointed in directions that made no sense together. For her family, the not knowing was about to get worse, because soon the phone would start to ring. It began about 5 months after she disappeared. In November of 1984, the Yamamoto family started receiving phone calls with no voice on the other end. Most of them lasted only seconds. The phone would ring, someone would pick up, and there would be nothing. Just an open line and then a click. At first, it might have been dismissed as a wrong number or a prank, but the calls kept coming over months, then over years, and a few of them did not behave like wrong numbers at all. On rare occasions, the silence stretched on for 10, even 15 minutes. Someone was there, listening, saying nothing. There is one call the family would never forget. It was reported that on one occasion, a faint voice finally answered. A few quiet words, something like, "I'm okay," spoken by someone who seemed to be crying, and then it was gone. Was it Miho? No one can say. There was no recording that settled it, no way to trace where the call had come from, no proof that the weak voice on the line belonged to the missing daughter and not to some cruel stranger who had learned the family's number. The call became, like everything else in this case, a thing that could be read 2 ways and proven neither. For a grieving family, though, an ambiguous voice is not nothing. It is a door held slightly open. If someone was calling, then someone was alive. And if someone was alive, then she had not drowned in June of 1984. She was somewhere, unable or unwilling to speak, reaching for home and pulling back. The calls continued on and off for about 4.5 years, and then, sometime around the summer of 1989, they simply stopped. The phone went quiet. Whoever had been on the other end, if it was anyone at all, was gone. The family was left with a silence louder than the calls had ever been, and no way to know what the silence meant. For most of the 1990s, Miho's case existed the way so many did, as a private ache, a face on a poster, a file that no one was actively working. Then, the ground shifted under the entire country. In October 2002, 5 Japanese citizens who had been abducted by North Korea years earlier were allowed to return home.
It was no longer a rumor or a fringe theory. Japan's own government now confirmed that agents had crossed the sea and taken ordinary people from ordinary places, many of them from coastlines exactly like the ones tied to Miho's case. Suddenly, every old disappearance near the water was worth a second look. Families who had spent decades being told their loved ones ran away began to ask a different, colder question. In January 2003, an investigative body was formed to examine people who might have been taken to North Korea. Miho's name was placed on its list, a list of individuals strongly suspected of abduction. Strongly suspected, not proven. That distinction matters, and it will matter until the very end of this story. The circumstances did seem to fit an unsettling pattern. A young woman, the right era, and that impossible bag found on a Sea of Japan beach, the same coast from which real abductions had been confirmed. Then came a claim that electrified her supporters. A former North Korean security official, a defector, stated that he believed he had seen Miho in Pyongyang sometime around the early 1990s. If true, it would mean she had been alive across the sea years after the official story said she had died at home. But that claim was never corroborated. No document confirmed it. No other witness backed it. It remained one man's uncertain testimony, powerful, haunting, and impossible to verify. In this case, that is a sentence you have to keep repeating, powerful and impossible to verify. A movement grew around her name anyway. Signature drives gathered tens of thousands of names, by some counts approaching 200,000 in total, demanding that her case be investigated as a possible abduction. The mystery of the library, the motorcycle, and the beach had become a cause. And it was precisely then, as the pressure mounted, that the police delivered an answer no one in her family was prepared for. In March 2004, the Yamanashi Prefectural Police made an announcement that was supposed to end the mystery. Instead, it split it in two. Working with a university laboratory, they said, DNA analysis had been carried out, comparing that unidentified body from Yuza, the one that had washed ashore in June 1984 and been buried as a stranger, against the blood of Miho's identical twin sister. And the DNA, they said, matched. Their conclusion was blunt. The body was Miho. She had drowned within weeks of disappearing, 20 years earlier, and had lain in an unmarked temple grave the entire time. The abduction theory, in their account, was over. There had been no Pyongyang, no silent caller, no crossing of the sea, only a tragedy at the water's edge. For many families, a DNA match is the end of the road, a hard, final fact. But the Yamamoto family did not accept it, and their reasons were specific. They said the body did not fit. According to the family, the measurements of the recovered body, height, and other physical proportions did not match Miho's known figures. They pointed to the recovered clothing, arguing the sizes could not have been hers. They raised the teeth. The body was reportedly missing a striking number of them, something the family found impossible to square with a healthy 20-year-old. And the belongings found with the body, clothing, personal items, were shown to her mother and her sister and were not recognized as Miho's. Then there was the way it had all been handled. The family said the DNA testing had been done without their knowledge, quietly over the previous year. And the actual report, the document that supposedly proved their daughter had been dead all along, was, by their account, never released to them.
A single unseen piece of paper stood between a family and the belief they had held for 2 decades. Out of that came the hardest allegation of all, that somewhere in the process, remains or data might have been mixed up or mishandled. It is important to be exact here. That is an allegation made by grieving people who feel they were not heard. It has never been established as a finding, but it captures the shape of the standoff perfectly. So here is where the case rests, and has rested ever since. The police say science answered the question. The body was Miho, and she drowned in 1984. Her family says the science pointed at a stranger, and that their daughter's real fate is still unknown. 2 positions, 1 grave, and no neutral authority has ever forced them together. This video is not going to tell you which side is right. No one honest can. But we can do something the noise around this case rarely does: lay the pieces out cleanly and ask what any answer would actually have to explain. Strip away the politics and the decades of argument, and this case comes down to a handful of stubborn facts that any true explanation has to account for. So let's build a checklist and then test each theory against it, not to crown a winner, but to see clearly where each one holds and where each one breaks. There are 5 things on the list. 1. The motorcycle, abandoned in the center of Kofu, not on a mountain road. 2. The handbag, on a beach 200 kilometers away, across the mountains on the far coast. 3. The silent calls, running for 4.5 years and then stopping. 4. The unidentified body at Yuza, and the DNA match the police say ties it to Miho. 5. The family's objections, the measurements, the teeth, the unrecognized belongings. Start with the official conclusion, the drowning. Its great strength is item 4. There really was a body, and there really was a DNA comparison that the authorities say matched. That is the single most concrete piece of physical evidence in the entire case, and no theory should wave it away. But the drowning explanation struggles with the geography and with item 5. If Miho drowned near where her bag came ashore, the family asks, how did her motorcycle end up abandoned in the middle of Kofu? And it has never had a clean answer to the measurements and the teeth, the very details that a family who knew her body insist do not fit. Now, the abduction theory. Its strength is atmosphere and pattern. The era was real. The confirmed abductions were real. The bag on the Sea of Japan coast points uncomfortably toward the same water. And the years of silent calls are far easier to explain if someone somewhere was alive and unable to speak. But its weaknesses are just as sharp. The one direct claim, the Pyongyang sighting, has never been corroborated by anything, and it collides head-on with item 4. If the DNA truly matches, the abduction story cannot be true. It leans on the calls and the pattern and asks you to set the science aside. Then the mix-up allegation, the idea that the wrong remains or the wrong data ended up in that report. Notice what it really is. It is not a 5th separate story about what happened to Miho. It is a challenge to item 4 itself, an argument that the one hard fact might not be as hard as it looks. If it were ever proven, it would knock the leg out from under the drowning conclusion and swing the door back open to everything else. But it has never been proven. It lives entirely in the gap left by a report the family says they were never allowed to see. And that is the quiet lesson of laying it out this way. Every theory in this case survives only by discounting one specific fact. The drowning has to discount the family's objections. The abduction has to discount the DNA. The mix-up has to discount the absence of any independent finding. There is no version of events that comfortably holds all 5 items at once. That is not a sign that the truth is hidden cleverly. It is a sign that somewhere in this chain, the body, the report, the memory of a grieving mother, at least one piece we are treating as solid is not. The map only makes sense if you are willing to erase part of it. The tragedy of Miho Yamamoto is that no one can agree on which part.
More than 40 years have passed since a young woman rode off to the library and did not return. The world she vanished from is gone. The motorcycle, the rotary phone in the dark, the beach where the bag came ashore, all of it belongs to another Japan now. But the question she left behind has not aged a day. In a temple in Yamagata, there are ashes that the police say are hers. A short drive away, there is a family that has spent decades refusing to believe it, still asking where their daughter really went, still unwilling to close a door that a single unseen document supposedly closed for them. Maybe she drowned in the cold water in the first weeks, and the science was right, and grief simply could not accept a stranger's grave. Maybe she was carried across the sea, and the answer is still standing somewhere on the other shore. Maybe the truth is some third thing no one has thought to look for. What we are left with is the shape of an absence, a bright morning, an ordinary sentence, and a silence that has never once broken. What do you think happened to Miho Yamamoto? Whose bones are in that grave? Leave your thoughts below.